Welcome everybody to the Vanderbilt Sports Society new video podcast. I'm really excited that the first guests in this series are the great Sally Jenkins, sports writer from the Washington Post, and my own father, David Maraniss, longtime reporter and editor at the Post. I was just thinking, you guys are probably two of the longest tenured Washington Post employees. Is that about right, Dad? How long have you been there? And Sally, when did you start at the Post?
Well, I've been there for 45 years. So I think I very well might be, well, Marty Weil has been there the longest, but he'll be there forever. Uh, he's the institution, but I might be the second longest now. I mean, for 20 years, I've been saying I don't recognize most of the bylines. So now it's definitely true, except when Sally writes something or Dan Balls.
That's right. And how about you, Sally?
I've been there 2 tours. The second one is 22 years. The first tour, when I was pretty much right out of college. That one lasted 7 years, so it's 30 years total.
Wow.
But it was separated by a few years at Sports Illustrated magazine and freelancing.
All right. And so the reason we're talking to you guys today is you collaborated on this great story, front page story on Jerry Jones, which has been getting so much attention around the country since it came out. Had y'all ever worked together on a story before?
No, well, only one time, 9/11. I contributed a few paragraphs to an overall piece that David was doing, but we didn't really collaborate directly on that. I just sent in a file of notes, on 9/11.
And it was a great file. It included an interview with a construction foreman, I believe, Sally can correct me if I'm wrong, who actually was looking up and saw the plane hit the tower. So it was exactly the kind of detail I was looking for, which of course is Sally Jenkins, and that's why it was so much fun to work with her for this piece.
Yeah. And so this piece is part of a series. I think one of the stories of the reaction to the piece is that a lot of people didn't actually read it, but so this
not a lot of people, some people.
Yes, right. But tell us about the larger, where this fit into a bigger picture about what the Post has been trying to do in examining race in the NFL.
Sally?
Well, it was part of a series called Blackout, which was an attempt to look at the disconnect between the fact that 60 to 70% of the players in the NFL are Black, and yet there are only 3 Black head coaches. And why wasn't the labor pool, the men who've spent their lives studying the game, why haven't people from that labor pool moved into the top executive positions in the league? And we examined that from several different angles. We homed in on one particular team, the New York Giants. We did features on individual assistant coaches, Black assistant coaches, who have been frustrated or thwarted in their attempt to become head coaches. And we did a really big data component, which was really the genesis of the project. In which some great young data people at our paper crunched numbers and found some very, very pretty staggering statistics that illustrate, that this isn't some, vague piece of social engineering, that the league is trying to do here. There's a real problem. The very few men who make it to head coaching positions spend an average of 9 years longer in mid-level assistant coaching jobs than their white counterparts. That was the biggest concrete investigative find. It was that particular number. Jerry Jones was just one angle on the entire subject. We wanted to look at it from the standpoint of an individual owner.
Mm-hmm. And so in the story, you mentioned that approached all owners in the NFL, and Jones was the only one that agreed to be part of an interview. Was that something that the NFL orchestrated to say, you're going to be our representative, or how did it come to be, you think, that Jones participated in this story?
Jones is the only one with the guts to talk about it. He I think knew it was in his best interest to talk about it because he probably suspected the picture was going to come up. It's been there in the public domain for so many years. That photo ran on the front page of the New York Times in 1957. And so I think he probably knew that if David and I were going to Little Rock and reporting in Little Rock, we would probably discover that photo and want to talk to him about it. That's number one. We did. We sent queries to all 32 teams individually. I wrote 6 of them myself, and got turned down by every single one except Jerry Jones. The league was cooperative. We spent some time talking to league officials. Roger Goodell never granted an interview either. So 31 owners and Roger Goodell didn't really have the backbone to sit down and talk directly about this. But Jerry Jones did, and we give him a lot of credit for that.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just that he was the only one with the guts to do it. I think perhaps it's a peculiar combination of him feeling invulnerable in one sense because he's such a big figure. And also, we found him to be introspective about certain things that most owners aren't. Whether he was BSing at times, certainly he was. But he also was revealing things that most owners wouldn't do. And so we do give him credit for that.
And well, you also in the article say that he lays awake at night, or he admits to this, how to get people to pay attention to us, look at me, look at me. I mean, so there must have been an aspect to this that is he the type like any publicity is good publicity for the Cowboys?
He basically said that.
Yeah.
And Sally can speak more to him, but he reminded me a lot of Bill Clinton, who I spent, many, many years studying, that same notion of, I just want to be out there. Clinton didn't mind being criticized so much as being ignored. The low point of his life was when he was declared irrelevant by the Gingrich Revolution. And Jerry sort of has that same mentality. And it's the showmanship that we write about that comes through his whole family.
Was it that Arkansas aspect that got you involved in this? Were you going to be partnering regardless of which owner agreed to do the story, or was it after it became clear that it was going to be Jerry Jones that would be the centerpiece?
Well, for me, that's all. When Steven Ginsberg, the managing editor, contacted me, he said, how would you like to come back and do a piece about Jerry Jones? I think they contacted Sally separately. And once at least from my perspective, once I heard that I could work on it with Sally, I was totally in.
Yeah, same story here. If it had been any owner but Jerry Jones, I probably wouldn't have been that interested. But the combination of Jerry Jones and David Maraniss was really irresistible.
Never heard that before.
Yeah. My big concern, actually, starting out with the story, my big concern was focus. What's the story really going to be about? It's unfair to stick Jerry Jones with the entire tab for racism in the NFL. What's the story going to be? As soon as I knew David was going to be doing it with me, I knew we would find the story, that we would find the focus, that David would get there, and find what the real through line and theme was supposed to be.
Well, sometimes I would imagine it's harder to work on a story with somebody else than just to do it alone. Like, how did you all decide, like, how you were going to break up the research or the writing? How do you approach teamwork in a story like this?
It was actually totally seamless from my perspective.
Yeah.
Sally's the one who first found the picture and sent it to me and said, does this look like Jerry Jones? And then we looked at the yearbooks, and yes, it certainly did look like Jerry Jones. And then I found an oral history that he had done with the University of Arkansas oral history project 12 years ago, where he actually brings this up. And so that confirmed it. But that's just the way, everything seemed to work, where we could bounce things off each other and find different things. And it was probably the most seamless partnership I've ever had writing.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think we pretty much we split up archives in Little Rock. David went to one archive and I went to another. We did a lot of the interviewing together, and that was really interesting because particularly directly in the Jerry Jones interview.
I lost Sally there.
Yeah, Sally, we lost you right at the key point.
Dad, why don't you continue with this about how you split up the archive?
Okay,
Sally will come back.
Yeah, Sally's a dogged researcher, and we went out to North Little Rock, and she would go to one archive and I'd go to another. We did almost all the interviews together, especially the key ones, which were Jerry Jones and Will McClay, his pseudo general. Sally, you back?
but I apologize.
That's all right.
Yeah.
You were right at the key point of saying something about the Jerry Jones interview when we lost you.
Yeah, that was so interesting. We asked very complimentary questions. David, I felt like we asked very complimentary questions in that interview.
I think that's absolutely right. So,
Yeah.
in that and everything else, I couldn't, it would have been a different story if I had done it without Sally, and probably she would say the same thing. But together, it just sort of had a certain magic to it.
Okay. I was waiting to get to the pictures. We've been mentioned a couple of times now, so let's go to that. So, Sally, you mentioned it was on the front page of the New York Times back in the 50s when it happened, and then so how did you find the picture? Were you aware that picture had been out there all these years, or was it just in the course of your research?
It was a complete no, it was just in the course of research. David and I got on the phone and we talked about where to start the reporting process, and we knew that we wanted to report around his origins in Little Rock, and we knew that it had been a hot spot for civil rights and school desegregation, and that Jerry would have been in high school during that crisis when Eisenhower sends the troops, the 101st Airborne, into Little Rock, and Little Rock people are spitting on Black kids. And so it was a natural place to start the reporting. And I just Googled, I literally typed in my search engine, when did North Little Rock High School desegregate? And up popped the story of the Little Rock Six, which I started reading about and sent to David. David I think we probably found that one concurrently. And I started reading about it, and we were exchanging clips and links to stories. And the picture popped up in one of the links. And I was like, wow, an AP reporter was there that day on the steps of Little Rock High School, along with Central High School. And, I was staring at the photo, and the natural thing was to say, no, there's no way Jerry Jones could be in this picture, is there? But, it was a natural thing to scan the photo. And there's this little triangle of a face, about 3 rows back, where you go, yeah, actually, that could be a young Jerry Jones. I've covered him enough, I've been in locker rooms and post-game press conferences enough to have a pretty good feel for his face. And it really looked like it could be him. And so then I sent it to David and said, am I nuts? But could this be Jerry Jones? And then we pulled the yearbooks and together. And from there, it became, that altered the trajectory of the reporting quite a lot, obviously. So,
yeah. So you look at the yearbooks and it appears to match up. But were you 100% certain when you laid that picture down in front of him in the room that it was him? Did you already know for sure? Or
we were 100% certain because we'd seen the oral history, where he acknowledges that he was there. By that, his interview was the second to last interview we did. But it was the center of everything that we were working toward. So we came into that room totally prepared. There was almost nothing that he could deceive us about. He actually told us some stories that we weren't expecting, which really sort of were incredible stories that helped directly with what we were doing. But we were totally prepared when we got to that room. And one other aspect to the photos is that after we'd established that it was him, in that oral history, he made the first claim that he was just curious and mischievous, and it had nothing to do with anything racist. But then we knew that Bill Strader, an AP photographer from Kansas City, had been the one to take the pictures. So we contacted a friend in Kansas City, Karen Ball, who used to work for the AP, and she found the whole archive of his photos, including some that established that anybody who was up on those top steps had to literally run around the North Little Rock Six to get up there. And so the notion that he was just curious was sort of deflated by that.
Okay. So in the interview itself, did you come with a printout, like a print of the picture, a copy of the front page of the New York Times? How did you literally present him with the photo that day?
We didn't actually. We didn't we didn't need to show him the photo. He was very familiar with it.
Okay.
And we were too. We were too. The way we presented it to him was actually, excuse me, it came in the course of conversation in which he was saying that he wanted very much to be in the forefront of NFL efforts to diversify head coaching ranks, but that they had to that coaches had to earn it. You know, he was talking about pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, and that led quite naturally to the question. Well, now, you know, 6 black high school students in 1957 walk up the steps of North Little Rock High because they're trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Let's talk about that day. And that's how we introduced the picture. That was
And how did he deal with that when you asked him about it?
Pretty much the same way he always has dealt with it. He tried to deflect it, you know, tried to tell different stories about something else. You know, he never, that was the thing about the entire interview. When it came close to a real difficult question and answer, he found ways to talk around it. So it was, again, you know, I was just curious. And of course I was just curious. And basically he said nobody up there knew what was going on or what was happening, which is complete garbage, of course.
I mean, David was very good about really holding him to a certain line, because he will take off on real tangents, and they're charming tangents. They're a lot of times they're great stories and very amusing. He was forthright about, you know, acknowledging that, yes, he was there. But you know, I was a kid, I was curious, you know, I just walked up there to see what was going on. And David said, now, Mr. Jones, we've done a lot of reporting. We've looked at a lot of these pictures. Here's the dynamic that day. And we know that other athletes were up there with you from your football team. And it was interesting because Jones's concern then became very much of protecting, first of all, saying, well, I don't know that those other people were up there, and so you'd better confirm that, because I can't say that they were on the steps that day. So he was protective of his old friends in that respect. And then the other thing that was interesting was he did acknowledge that events that day had gotten physical. He said, I do recall that it got physical, which was gratifying. That, you know, he was pretty forthright about, you know, not evading that he was there and not evading the basic import and viciousness of the event, but really framing himself as a bystander. You know, and the one thing I will say is that when you look at the picture, the men in the forefront of the picture are much older and more active seeming in the photo. And Jones is younger, and he is standing back a little bit. So we kind of, because we kind of had to take him a little bit at his word on that, because the photo shows what it shows, you know.
But the essence of the answer, which got to the point of the whole story in a sense, was that he didn't express any remorse about the way those 6 young black men were treated. He was more concerned about him getting in trouble with his coach, who told them not to be there that morning. So it was a completely, and the answer was entirely in his own self-interest. He didn't deny it, but he didn't really see the import of what happened that day.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, and this kind of gets to that, you know, there's been, in the reaction to the story, which for it seems on Twitter anyway, it's a lot of reaction to the picture itself, which in some tweets has been mischaracterized as being at Little Rock Central High School also. But I mean, it's a really significant picture. Wow, there's Jerry Jones blocking the way for these black students to try to desegregate a school, which I was shocked to read in the story that school doesn't end up being desegregated for almost a decade after that event there that morning. Like, what does it mean? He's 80 years old. This was, you know, over half a century ago. What is the significance of him standing there and being in that picture, given the position he's in now?
Well, I've always said, you know, writing biographies about major figures, that they shouldn't be held totally responsible for what they did as teenagers. But there's a difference, there's a line between that and using someone's background and the forces that shape them to understand them. So that, that requires a level of intellect among the readers, which perhaps we're demanding too much sometimes. But that's basically it. That picture, as I said earlier, the way he responded was actually more as illuminating or more so than the picture itself, in terms of the way he looks at things from his own fairly selfish perspective. But it also echoed many things that we saw later in his life. And I think, to understand the forces that shaped someone, help you understand how they are today.
And I think more broadly, just in general, the separateness of the two experiences was, to me, the most important element of the story, because the separateness of what the Little Rock, North Little Rock Six experienced and what Jerry Jones experiences really is mirrored by what Black coaches experience in the NFL. There's an obstacle, right? There's a blockade in the doorway, and without being too pat or neat about this, the fact of the matter is that one of the things that troubles Black coaches in the league is there's this sort of implacable lack of understanding of what their experience is. And so white owners say, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or, these jobs are hard to get, but we just want to find the best, most winning candidate. And what men are experiencing is very contrary to that. It's something else, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're trying to get at, is the fundamental lack of understanding in those two experiences.
Absolutely.
And Jerry Jones is Jerry Jones is just one of many people who have a very separate, white, more privileged experience, right? And we didn't want to write some, woke tract on white privilege. That's not the story. That's not it. The story is the impasse, right? The block in the doorway.
Right. And it was an interesting anecdote that you all revealed in the story too, about him trying to relate to some Black coaches at an accelerator program, and the story that he chooses to tell about how he figured out an angle and how he made it really was a pretty tone deaf story. Can you relate that for those who haven't read the story yet?
I mean, that was an interesting anecdote, because we thought it was something we were going to have to confront him over. We'd heard about the story from someone who had been there, and that it hadn't been a great moment for Jones in his attempt to sort of work with the people in the accelerator room. And then Jones told the story himself. Actually, he brought it up and told the story himself. And he told it, made it clear to us in the way he told the story that he really didn't understand that that young Black aspirational entrepreneurial men do not have the access to Augusta National Golf Club and to lines of credit from large banks to launch their careers that he has had, and that young white men in the NFL, coming out of the NFL, might have. I mean, the irony of the whole accelerator program is that the one guy whose career got accelerated that day was a guy named Jeff Saturday, who was there as a speaker, right? He's just appearing there as a speaker. He's the guy who gets plucked and handed a head coaching job.
I was going to bring him up when I'm reading the story about, and you're talking about 9 years more these assistant coaches, Black coaches, have to put into it. And Jones is saying these opportunities don't just fall into your lap. Well, it fell into Jeff Saturday's lap.
Yeah. And I think the person who may have influenced Jerry Jones more than anyone is his vice president of personnel, Will McClay, who I think has probably done more to explain to Jones, look, one thing Will McClay, I think, said to Jerry Jones was, my father fought in Vietnam as a Marine, and he came home and he couldn't get a home loan, right? He couldn't get a mortgage, much less, the $1 million lines of credit that Jerry Jones got in building his career. And Jones's attitude all through the interview was very much, if they did get what they want. And that simply isn't the case, right? His Black peers do not have the access that he has.
That's why, for as much as we could see that Will McClay did have an effect on Jones, and as much as Jones said at various points during the interview that he got it and wanted to change, even after he told that story about Augusta National, when we responded by saying, well, do you understand how that would be play with the Black men in that audience? He didn't seem to, really. His answer after that was inadequate. I mean, it's still very much a work in progress with Jerry Jones.
Mm-hmm. And, I think in reading the story, he was saying like he wants to get better on this, or the Cowboys were saying, look, we've got Will McClay in this position, or we've hired these Black strength coaches. But you also lay out in the story, he's been Odin for 33 years, 8 head coaches, all white, just 2 Black coordinators in that entire time, none since 2008. So you could make a case that it's gotten worse rather than better in some ways. He's donated to Donald Trump. I mean, like, what evidence has he shown that he actually cares about this issue?
Well, I think he would say, he would point to a lot of private work he's done with his players. He's very supportive of his players when they get into legal trouble. He has a sensitivity to young Black men just coming into the league as players and helping them become financially stable, protecting their long-term finances. He does a lot of talking with them about not blowing it up front and protecting your money, learning to invest, things like that. I mean, I think he would say that he gets right in the middle of his players' future, issues and futures, and he has promoted Will McClay, and there's no question about it. He's made Will McClay one of the most coveted executives in the NFL and highly paid. The one thing Will McClay doesn't have is the general manager title, which matters to him. We talked to him. David asked Will McClay, is that title important to you? And it was, and Jones hasn't given it to him, mainly because Jerry Jones wants the title for himself. So I think that if they do win a Super Bowl, Jerry Jones wants to say that he was the GM of that team. And I'm not sure Jones understands that the title means something to Will McClay, and that how much Will McClay would like to have that title.
Yeah.
I think you could probably say that Jerry Jones has at least as good and maybe a better relationship with Black athletes than most of the other owners. I mean, on a personal level. And Sally interviewed Emmett Smith, who told that interesting story about Jerry letting Emmett sit in on any meetings just to learn how to do it, to become, a business person. But, that only goes so far. And as Sally has emphasized so many times, the real key is the impasse. So even in terms of his coaching staff, which is now at least 50% or more African American, back in the old days, they would have what they called stacking of players. All the Black players would be wide receivers or defensive backs, and not at the skilled positions. Well, that's sort of what they've done with the coaching staff. The strength and conditioning staff is all Black, right? But there are no Black coordinators.
David's exactly right. It's interesting. The NFL coaching staffs today look like NFL player rosters in the 1970s, right? The management structure is probably 35 to 40 years behind the progress of rosters. It's the Black quarterback syndrome is playing out at the executive management and coaching level, and it's very strange.
We'll try to wrap this up here. I know you both have busy days. My daughter is home sick today, so I need to help her out with some juice and some medicine. But I mean, in reporting the story and the sort of the overall series, even bigger than your story, I mean, you're looking at these owners in the NFL who are making the decisions. For the most part, they're older, extremely wealthy, sort of cocooned types of people. Like, even Jerry Jones himself says the Rooney Rule is ineffective. I hire people based on who I know, not interviews. I mean, coming away from this experience of reporting the story, what do you think it will take for more Black coaches to get their opportunity to lead teams in the NFL?
Sally?
I go back to this reminds me a lot of, like, if you look back at what JFK was trying to do with the Civil Rights Act in 1963, he wasn't just trying to sort of legislate certain things like with public accommodations laws. He's trying to create a change of heart and a change of perception. And he spoke so eloquently about that. And that's what he really asked the country to do in that speech. Something similar has to happen among these 31 billionaires and the Green Bay Packers. They have to, there has to be an enlightenment of the heart before it's really going to change, because trying to engineer it with, miniature civil rights, Rooney Rule tweaks that mandate more interviews, the mandates aren't working. They're not. There has to be some kind of intellectual, emotional acceptance and shift in perception of young Black men to the point that they can hand them the keys to billion-dollar organizations.
I agree with that. I think that another generation of owners might handle it somewhat differently. But I also think that in pure practical terms, the NFL is a huge capitalist enterprise. It maybe emblemized capitalism more than any other institution in America. And I think that money also matters. And Jerry Jones sort of got to that a little bit. The real reason that he's interested in diversity is because he has a diverse audience. And so the more diverse America becomes, the more pressure there'll be on these owners to match that.
Maybe more diverse billionaires to own teams and make the hiring decisions too.
Exactly.
All right. Well, David, Sally, thank you so much for taking time to be part of this discussion. Fantastic story. Encourage everybody to read the article and to form their own opinions. But thank you so much and have a great day.
Okay.